My wife cheated on me with our neighbor, but then I discovered his dark past, and everything changed. I guess this is where I share the story I never thought I'd be telling. My name's Tom, and I've been married to Lisa for 6 years. If you'd asked me 6 months ago, I would have told you that we were solid. No major fights, always in sync, and we had a pretty comfortable life. I thought everything was great until all the weirdness started. It wasn't anything huge at first. Little things, like Lisa being glued to her phone at night, or making excuses about why she didn't want to hang out with our usual friends on weekends. She'd always been a bit of a social butterfly, but lately, it was like she couldn't be bothered. I brushed it off. People get busy, right? Work was crazy for her, or so she said. She started working late a lot, but then again, she always had a demanding job. I didn't see the warning signs, though. Looking back, they were all there. Every single one. The extra long showers. The way she'd go to run errands and come back 3 hours later without having bought anything. But the thing that really got to me? The time she'd be on the phone and suddenly lower her voice when I walked into the room. I figured she was just venting about work to a friend. I didn't want to be that paranoid guy. But I had this gut feeling. I should have trusted it from the start. So, like I said, things started to feel off. I tried not to obsess over it, even though it was eating away at me. But one evening, something happened that made me question everything. It was a Friday night, and Lisa was out running errands. Again. I was at home, just watching some TV, when her phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. I normally wouldn't have even looked, but the name that popped up on the screen caught my eye. Frank's Firewood, it said. Weird, right? We don't even have a fireplace. Out of curiosity, I swiped the notification to see the message. It was a string of texts that made my stomach turn. They weren't about firewood at all. They were more like, can't wait to see you tonight, and I'll meet you at the usual place. Usual place? What usual place? My head started spinning. I couldn't believe it. Frank's Firewood was obviously some kind of code. But who was Frank? My mind immediately jumped to one of her old friends from high school, Frank Davis. I'd only met him once or twice at reunions, but he always gave off this sleazy vibe. I didn't think Lisa even talked to him anymore. That night, when she came home, I didn't confront her right away. I wanted to, but I needed more proof. I felt like if I just accused her without something solid, she'd just flip it on me, make me feel like the crazy one. I had to be smart about this. The betrayal wasn't just a punch to the gut. It was like someone had lit a slow-burning fuse inside me. After seeing those texts, I couldn't just sit there and let it go. But I knew Lisa well enough to know she was clever. If I confronted her right away, she'd find a way to twist it, or worse, lie her way out of it. I needed to catch her in the act, with no room for her to wriggle free. The next day, I made up some excuse about needing to visit my brother out of town for the weekend. Lisa barely blinked, said she'd have a quiet weekend and do some shopping. The lack of interest in my plans should have been a red flag, but it just confirmed what I suspected. She was already planning something else. That night, I didn't go to my brother's. Instead, I parked my car a couple of blocks away from our house and walked back, sticking to the shadows like some wannabe detective. I set up camp in my neighbor's yard, Mrs. Henderson's place. She's this sweet, old lady who goes to bed at 8 p.m. and wouldn't notice if a parade went by her house. Perfect cover. Lisa left the house around 9 p.m., dressed way too fancy for a night of quiet shopping. She was in a black dress I hadn't seen her wear in months. I followed her from a distance, watching as she drove out of our neighborhood. My heart was pounding in my chest, half from the anxiety of getting caught, half from the dread of what I might find. She drove for about 15 minutes and pulled into this seedy-looking motel on the outskirts of town. That's when my heart sank. It wasn't just dinner with a friend. She was meeting him there. Frank. It all made sense now. The secret messages, the late nights, the unexplained absences. I sat in my car across the street, staring at the motel door she disappeared into. Everything in me wanted to storm in there, catch her red-handed. but I stayed put. I was too angry, too hurt to move. If I went in, I wasn't sure what I'd do. I sat there in my car, watching the door to that dingy motel room, my thoughts spiraling. The anger, the hurt, it was all building up inside me. I wasn't ready to face her. Not yet. I needed to know for sure. I needed undeniable proof. Otherwise, she'd twist it around, say I was imagining things. I stayed parked across the street for what felt like hours. Around midnight, I finally saw movement. The door opened, and out walked Lisa, her hair a mess, that black dress slightly wrinkled. My stomach turned, but what really hit me was the man who followed her out. It wasn't Frank. It was our neighbor, Mike. Mike, the guy who lived 3 houses down and who had always been overly friendly at our barbecues. He was the guy who always offered to help out when I wasn't around, fixing things, mowing the lawn when I was working late. I never thought much of it. I mean, Mike was married, too, to Sarah, a woman I'd known since we moved into the neighborhood. Seeing him with Lisa, it was like everything snapped into place. They'd been seeing each other right under my nose. While I was at work or running errands, they were sneaking around, using Frank's firewood as their little cover. I wanted to march over there, grab Mike by the collar, and demand an explanation, but I knew I needed to keep my cool. I couldn't just burst in there and start a scene. That wouldn't help. So, I took a picture of them together, Lisa leaning into him as they laughed, heading back to their cars. Proof. Cold, hard proof. On the drive home, my hands were shaking. My mind was racing. I wasn't just angry anymore. I felt this deep sadness, like the life I thought we had was a lie. I thought about all the times Lisa had lied to my face, told me she was going out with friends or working late. And the worst part, Mike was supposed to be our friend. The next morning, I woke up with this strange sense of calm. I had stayed up most of the night, replaying everything in my mind, the lies, the motel, Mike. By the time Lisa woke up, I had already made up my mind. It was time to confront her. She came downstairs, still in her bathrobe, yawning like nothing was wrong. "Morning," she said casually, pouring herself a cup of coffee. I couldn't believe how normal she was acting, like she wasn't living a double life. That was the moment I realized how good she was at lying, how easily she had been playing me. I didn't waste any time. "Who's Frank?" I asked, my voice steady, though I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. Lisa froze, the coffee mug halfway to her lips. For a split second, I saw a flicker of panic in her eyes before she quickly masked it with confusion. "Frank, what are you talking about?" "Frank's firewood," I said, pulling out my phone and opening the text I'd seen. "You've been getting messages from him, meeting him at the usual place." "So, who is he?" She set the mug down slowly, her face a mix of disbelief and anger. "Are you seriously accusing me of something?" "Tom, that's insane. Frank is just someone from work. We were coordinating a delivery for his business. I can't believe you're spying on me." I knew she'd try to deflect, so I stayed calm. "Cut the crap, Lisa. I followed you last night. You weren't meeting Frank. You were with Mike." That did it. Her face went pale, and her mouth opened, but no words came out. For the first time, she didn't have a quick lie ready. She was caught, and she knew it. "I saw you leave that motel with him, Lisa. I took pictures." I shoved my phone in front of her face, the image of her with Mike staring back at her. "So don't stand there and act like I'm crazy. You've been lying to me, and I want to know how long this has been going on." Her shoulders slumped, and she sank into the chair, suddenly looking a lot smaller than she had a moment ago. "Tom, it's not what you think," she started, but I cut her off. "Don't. Just don't. I want the truth for once." "How long?" Lisa buried her face in her hands, her voice shaky. 6 months, maybe more. 6 months. 6 months of lies, sneaking around, pretending everything was fine between us. After Lisa admitted to the 6 months of sneaking around with Mike, I sat there, numb, trying to make sense of it. Why? I finally asked, my voice quieter than I expected. What did I do to deserve this? She looked down, her hands trembling as she fiddled with the edge of her robe. It wasn't about you, Tom. It just happened, she said, her voice shaky. Mike was there when you weren't. I didn't plan for this. It just spiraled. Spiral, I repeated, disbelief thick in my throat. So, what? You just accidentally fell into an affair with a guy 3 doors down? Come on, Lisa. Give me something real. She bit her lip, eyes darting away, avoiding mine. It's not that simple. We were going through the motions, you know? Things between us got routine. Mike made me feel alive again, wanted in a way I hadn't felt in years. Her voice cracked, as if she was trying to make me sympathize with her. Wanted. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. So, because I was working late to keep this house running, because I didn't constantly shower you with attention, that gave you permission to betray me? With him, she flinched at my words but didn't try to defend herself. I didn't mean for it to go this far, she whispered. It was just supposed to be an escape. An escape. That's what she called it. Like our marriage was some kind of prison she had to break out of. Hearing her say that, I realized this wasn't just about Mike. This was about her wanting something I couldn't give her anymore, and that hurt more than anything. Lisa's words hung in the air, an escape, like some twisted justification for what she'd done. I leaned back, staring at her, trying to wrap my head around the woman sitting in front of me. This wasn't the Lisa I thought I knew. So, it's my fault then. I wasn't enough for you, I asked, trying to keep my voice steady, though the anger was bubbling up inside me. No, it's not like that, she said quickly. I'm not blaming you. It's just, I felt trapped, Tom. You were always busy, always working, and I don't know, I just needed something more. I didn't want to hurt you. I couldn't help but laugh, bitter and cold. Didn't want to hurt me? Lisa, you've been sneaking around behind my back for half a year. How did you think this was going to end? She shook her head, tears streaming down her face now. I don't know. I wasn't thinking. It just started with texts, and then it snowballed. I wasn't planning to. She stopped, covering her face with her hands. That's the thing, Lisa. I interrupted, my voice rising. You didn't plan it, but you let it happen. You chose to keep going. Every time you lied to my face, you made a choice. She didn't have an answer for that. She just sat there, sobbing quietly, while I felt my anger shift into something worse, an overwhelming sadness. I sat there, watching Lisa break down, but I didn't feel sympathy anymore, just a hollow, gnawing pain. So what now? I asked, my voice tired, drained. You've been sneaking around with Mike for months. Where does that leave us? She didn't answer right away, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand, trying to pull herself together. I don't know, she whispered. I never thought this would come out like this. I didn't want to lose you. Didn't want to lose me? I repeated, feeling the weight of her words. Lisa, you already lost me the second you chose him. The second you decided that lying to my face, sneaking around, was better than talking to me. She winced, and for the first time, I saw real guilt in her eyes. I'm sorry, Tom. I didn't want this to happen. I didn't know how to stop it. I stood up, unable to sit still anymore. You didn't know how to stop it. I paced the room, the frustration spilling over. You stop it by not starting it, by coming to me when you felt trapped, instead of running off to the neighbor like some kind of teenage fling. She stayed silent, looking up at me with tear-streaked cheeks. But there was no defense left, just a quiet, broken confession that she couldn't fix this. And neither could I. After a long stretch of silence, I finally stopped pacing and sat back down, my head in my hands. I had been running through every scenario in my mind, how we could possibly come back from this. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized we couldn't. The damage was done. I can't do this, Lisa, I said quietly, not looking up. I can't just pretend like this didn't happen. She looked at me, her eyes wide, like she hadn't expected me to say it out loud. What do you mean? I mean this. I gestured between us. It's over. You made your choice, and I can't live with it. I can't trust you anymore. Her face crumpled, and she started crying again. Tom, no. Please. We can fix this. I'll do whatever it takes. Therapy, counseling, anything. Just don't give up on us. But I had already made my decision. The trust between us was shattered, and no amount of therapy could glue it back together. I wanted to scream at her, to make her understand the depth of the pain she had caused, but I was too exhausted. Instead, I stood up, grabbed my keys, and headed for the door. I need some space, I said, without looking back. I'll be staying somewhere else for a while. As I walked out the door, I knew that a while might just turn into forever. I drove around for hours that night, aimlessly wandering through the streets, unsure where to go or what to do. Everything felt surreal, like I was watching my life fall apart from the outside. Eventually, I pulled into a motel parking lot. Not the one where I saw Lisa with Mike, but some random place on the edge of town. It felt fitting in a way. Everything had come full circle. I checked in, threw my bag on the bed, and just sat there, staring at the wall. The weight of what had just happened hit me all at once. I had walked out on my wife, my home, my life, because she had destroyed everything we'd built. The next morning, my phone was flooded with texts from Lisa, begging me to come back, to talk things through. She promised she would end things with Mike, and that we could work on our marriage. But it was too late. Every message felt like an empty plea, and reading them just made me feel more hollow. I didn't respond. I couldn't. There was nothing left to say. Later that day, I called my brother and told him what had happened. He was shocked but supportive, telling me I could crash at his place for as long as I needed. It was a relief to hear a familiar voice. But even then, I knew this wasn't going to be a temporary thing. Something in me had changed. Staying at my brother's place gave me time to think, but it also made everything more real. I wasn't going home. Lisa and I weren't going to fix things, and the life we had together was over. I'd spend hours just staring at the ceiling, wondering how it all fell apart. Lisa kept texting, calling, trying to explain, trying to beg for another chance. She would send long, emotional messages about how she'd made a mistake and how much she loved me. But every time I looked at my phone, all I could think about was her walking out of that motel with Mike, laughing like nothing was wrong. It got to the point where I couldn't handle seeing her name pop up anymore. I blocked her number, not out of anger, but because I needed space to breathe. I didn't want to hear her apologies, not when they couldn't change what she'd done. Meanwhile, I started making arrangements. I told my boss I needed some time off, explained the situation without going into too much detail. He understood, even offered his support, but I could tell he was uncomfortable. How do you explain to someone that your wife cheated with your neighbor and everything you knew is now upside down? I hadn't told anyone else yet. Not my parents, not our friends. I wasn't ready to face the questions or the pity. It was like I needed to keep it to myself for just a little longer until I figured out how to live in this new reality. After a week of avoiding her calls and messages, I knew it was time to face the inevitable. We needed to talk about divorce. I couldn't keep hiding from it, and there was no going back to what we once had. I unblocked Lisa's number and sent a simple message. We need to talk. I'll be by the house tomorrow. The next day, I drove over, my stomach in knots the entire ride. When I pulled into the driveway, everything felt so familiar, yet so foreign. This was the home we built together, and now it felt like a place I didn't belong. Lisa opened the door before I even knocked. She looked like she hadn't slept, her eyes red and puffy from crying. Tom, I'm so sorry, she started immediately, her voice trembling. I held up a hand, stopping her. I'm not here to rehash everything. We both know where we are. I took a deep breath, steadying myself. We need to talk about divorce. Her face crumpled, and she collapsed onto the couch. Please, Tom, don't do this. We can get through this. I'll end it with Mike, I swear. But I'd already made up my mind. It's too late for that, Lisa. You didn't just betray me. You broke something that can't be fixed. This isn't about Mike. It's about the lies, the choices you made. She sobbed harder, but I stayed firm. We talked logistics. Who would take what? How we'd go about selling the house. It was surreal, dividing up the life we had built like it was nothing more than a checklist. As we sat there, dividing up our lives like it was just business, it hit me how final this all was. There was no going back. Lisa tried to hold herself together as we discussed the details, but every few minutes, she would break down, apologizing over and over again. I never meant for this to happen, she kept saying. I didn't think it would go this far. I stayed silent, letting her words wash over me. I didn't have the energy to argue anymore. What was the point? We both knew what had happened, and no amount of regret could undo it. After we discussed the house and the bank accounts, Lisa looked at me with tear-filled eyes. What about us, Tom? Can't we try, even just a little? I love you. I don't want to lose you. Her words didn't hit the way they used to. I was already too far gone. Lisa, we've already lost each other. This isn't something we can just move past. Every time I look at you, all I'll see is what you did. She tried to reach out, placing a hand on my arm, but I pulled away. I'm sorry, I said softly, but this is the end for us. She broke down completely then, sobbing into her hands. I felt a pang of sadness, not just for her, but for the life we were supposed to have. The future we had imagined was gone, and all that was left was this cold, empty reality. Without saying anything else, I stood up and left the house. As the door closed behind me, I knew that chapter of my life was officially over. Leaving the house that day felt like stepping into a new world, one where Lisa wasn't my wife anymore, and where the future I had imagined with her no longer existed. As much as I prepared for it, the reality of moving on felt heavier than I expected. For the first few weeks, I stayed with my brother, but eventually I found an apartment of my own. It wasn't much, just a small place on the other side of town, but it was mine, a fresh start, away from the memories of what had happened. I filled the space with things that had nothing to do with my past life, new furniture, new decorations. It was strange, trying to build a life from scratch at 34, but there was something oddly freeing about it too. Lisa tried reaching out a few more times, mostly through long, emotional emails. She begged for forgiveness, for another chance, but I never responded. I had nothing left to say. We had already said everything that mattered. It was hard to ignore her, though, especially when the memories of our good times would creep in. But I knew going back would only make things worse. As for Mike, I haven't spoken to him or seen him since the confrontation. From what I heard through the grapevine, his wife found out too, and they're going through their own messy divorce. I guess karma came around for him, but honestly, I wasn't focused on revenge. All I wanted was to move forward, away from all of it. It wasn't easy. The nights were the hardest. Coming home to an empty apartment, realizing I was truly alone now. But slowly, I started to feel something I hadn't felt in months. Peace. As I walked away from Lisa that day in the grocery store, I thought it was over, but then something happened that changed everything. Later that evening, while I was clearing out some old boxes in the garage, I found something strange. An old shoebox tucked away in the corner, covered in dust. I didn't recognize it, but it had Lisa's handwriting on the top. I hadn't seen this box during the move, and curiosity got the better of me. When I opened it, I found a stack of old letters and some printed emails. They were dated over the last few years, from before the affair with Mike started. At first, I thought they were just old work papers, but as I scanned through them, I realized they weren't about work at all. The letters were from Mike's wife, Sarah. In them, she talked about her suspicions that Mike was having an affair with someone else entirely, not Lisa. My hands started shaking as I read through them. Sarah had known about Mike's cheating for years, but she hadn't known with whom. The way she wrote made it clear she was scared to confront him directly. She even mentioned seeing Mike sneaking around with multiple women over time, none of whom were Lisa. Then, there was an email from Mike to Sarah where he admitted to his infidelity, but not with Lisa. He apologized for what he called past mistakes and swore it was over. That email was sent months before I found out about Lisa's affair with Mike. Why had Lisa kept these letters? Why hadn't Sarah told me the full story? Was this affair with Mike just the tip of the iceberg, or was there something more going on that Lisa never told me? Suddenly, I wasn't so sure about what I thought I knew. After finding those letters and printed emails, something inside me shifted. I thought I had the full picture. Lisa had cheated on me with Mike, and that was the end of it. But now, everything seemed more complicated than I could have imagined. Why had Lisa kept Sarah's letters? Why didn't Sarah ever mention Mike's previous affairs when she found out about him and Lisa? Sarah's letters detailed years of suspicion, hinting that Mike had been cheating long before Lisa. It wasn't just one affair. There were multiple women, and according to Sarah, none of them had been Lisa at first. As I sat there, reading through the letters over and over, my mind started to spiral. Was Lisa just another woman Mike had targeted? Someone who had fallen into his pattern of betrayal? Or had she known about Mike's past and still gone through with it? The more I thought about it, the harder it was to believe that Lisa had been completely innocent in all of this. But at the same time, there was a nagging feeling that maybe things weren't as clear-cut as I had thought. I started questioning everything. Was this really just an affair? Or was Mike manipulating Lisa the way he had manipulated other women? Could it have been more than a simple betrayal? Something darker, something more calculated? Or had Lisa known exactly what she was doing, keeping this information hidden as a way to protect herself if things ever came crashing down? It wasn't just about the affair anymore. It was about the lies, the secrets, and the possibility that I hadn't been told the whole truth. For months, I had believed that Lisa's infidelity was the biggest betrayal, but now I wasn't so sure. Could there have been more to this story that I had missed? Was Lisa hiding something even bigger? I realized I needed answers. For the first time since I confronted Lisa, I wasn't just angry. I was curious. The truth, whatever it was still out there, and I couldn't move on until I found it. The next morning, I couldn't stop thinking about the letters. There had to be more to this story than just Lisa's affair with Mike. I decided to reach out to Sarah, Mike's wife, hoping she could shed some light on what had really been going on. We arranged to meet at a small cafe outside of town. When I got there, Sarah looked tense, her hands wrapped around her coffee cup like it was her only anchor. I sat down, and after a few awkward moments of silence, I dove in. "I found the letters you wrote to Mike," I said carefully. "Why didn't you tell me about his other affairs when everything came out with Lisa?" Sarah looked down, clearly uncomfortable. "I didn't know how, Tom," she said softly. "When I found out about Mike and Lisa, it was like the last straw. Mike's been cheating for years. Lisa wasn't the first. There were other women from his work, women I didn't even know." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. I had been so focused on Lisa's betrayal, I hadn't considered that she might have just been one of many. Did Lisa know about the others? I asked, my voice barely steady. Sarah shook her head. "I don't think so. Mike's good at hiding things. She probably thought she was special to him, but she wasn't. None of them were. He used them all, Tom." Hearing that made my stomach turn. Lisa had fallen into a web of lies spun by Mike, just like the others before her. I couldn't believe how deep this went, how long it had been happening. Suddenly, it wasn't just about Lisa's betrayal. It was about the bigger picture, about how Mike had manipulated everyone around him. The conversation with Sarah weighed heavily on me. Mike wasn't just a man who had an affair with my wife. He was a serial cheater, manipulating women and weaving lies for years. The truth was far more complicated than I had ever imagined, and I needed to hear Lisa's side of it. I couldn't leave this alone without confronting her one last time. That evening, I texted Lisa, asking if we could meet. She agreed, probably thinking I was finally ready to talk about our divorce. When I arrived at the house, She looked anxious, like she was bracing herself for another difficult conversation. Little did she know what I had uncovered. "We need to talk," I said, not wasting any time. I spoke to Sarah. She told me about Mike, about how this wasn't the first time he's done this. Lisa's face went pale. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Mike's been cheating for years, Lisa. You weren't the first woman he's manipulated. He's been using women, lying to them, making them think they're special. Did you know about the others?" She looked shocked, and for a moment, I wasn't sure if she was acting or genuinely blindsided. "No," she whispered. "I had no idea. I thought he cared about me." The realization seemed to hit her all at once. She had been another pawn in Mike's game, just like the women before her. I watched as the guilt and shame settled over her face. "I didn't know," she repeated, tears welling in her eyes. "I thought it was just us." I didn't know what to feel at that moment. Part of me still held on to the anger, but another part started to see that maybe Lisa wasn't as much in control of the situation as I had thought. She had been deceived, just like I had. As Lisa sat there, the reality of what had happened seemed to sink in. The tears in her eyes, the guilt written across her face. It was like she was finally realizing the weight of everything. But that didn't erase the fact that she had still made the choice to betray me. Whether or not she was manipulated by Mike, she had crossed a line that couldn't be undone. "I can't believe I fell for it," she said softly, wiping away a tear. "I thought he was different. I didn't know he had done this before." I watched her, feeling a mix of emotions, anger, betrayal, pity, all swirling inside me. "You still made a choice, Lisa," I said, my voice quieter than I expected. "You could have come to me. You could have told me when things started to feel wrong, but you didn't." "I know," she whispered, shaking her head. "I don't have an excuse. I let myself get carried away, and I ruined everything." There was a long silence between us. The air felt heavy with the weight of the truth, and I could see Lisa struggling to process it all. Maybe she hadn't known about Mike's pattern, but that didn't change the fact that she had been part of it. Whether she knew or not, she had let it happen. "I never wanted to hurt you, Tom," she finally said, her voice breaking. "I didn't think it would go this far. I made a mistake." A mistake. That word felt too small for what had happened. This wasn't some minor slip-up. It was a betrayal that shattered the trust between us. And even though Mike had his own twisted role in it, Lisa had been willing to go along with it. After hearing Lisa's words, I sat there, feeling strangely numb. I had spent months thinking about this moment, about how I would feel when the truth finally came out. But now, all I felt was a quiet exhaustion, like I had carried this weight for too long. "I understand that you made a mistake," I said, my voice steady. "But we can't go back. We can't rebuild what's been broken." Lisa nodded, tears still running down her face. "I know," she whispered. "I don't expect you to forgive me. I needed you to know I'm sorry." I stood up, feeling a sense of finality wash over me. "I believe you," I said, surprising myself with how calm I felt. "But that doesn't change where we are. I can't stay in this. We need to move on." For the first time in months, Lisa didn't try to argue. She just nodded, defeated, knowing that there was no fixing what had happened. We talked briefly about the next steps, the divorce, splitting up the house, our separate futures. It was a practical conversation, but it felt like closing the final chapter of something that had already ended. As I walked out of the house, I felt lighter. The anger, the confusion, the endless questions, they didn't weigh me down anymore. I knew the truth, and I had faced it head on. Now, it was time to move forward. I didn't know what my future would look like, but I was ready to find out. Maybe in the end. That was the real lesson in all of this. No matter how badly you're hurt, you can always choose to rebuild, to start again. And as I drove away from the life I once had, I realized I was ready for that next step.